Imagine a world where history isn't a straight line of progress, but a carefully curated lie designed to keep you in the dark. In August of 1883, deep within the Appalachian Mountains of Tennessee, a team of miners struck something that should not exist. They didn't find coal, and they didn't find gold. They broke through a wall of smooth, engineered stone and stepped into a sealed vault. Inside, resting in a chamber of advanced masonry, lay the remains of a human being nearly 9 feet tall. The newspapers of the day called it the discovery of the century. Then, the Smithsonian stepped in, and the world went silent. Where did the Tennessee giants go, and why was a global civilization wiped from our maps? To understand the mystery of the Tennessee Vault, we have to travel back to a time when the American frontier was screaming with anomalies. In the late 1800s, the United States was gripped by giant fever. From the Ohio Valley to the shores of the Clinch River, the earth was literally coughing up evidence of a lost world. In the summer of 1883, near a remote area known as Laurel Creek, a man named James Kelly led a crew into the darkness of a new mine shaft. They weren't looking for history, but they hit it head-on. The pickaxes didn't strike dirt. They rang out against a surface that felt like unnatural stone. What they uncovered was a massive stone sepulchre, sealed with a substance that looked more like modern cement than primitive mud. News of the giant of the hills spread like wildfire. Headlines across the nation reported on the massive stature of the remains and the sophisticated nature of the tomb. But as soon as the word Smithsonian was mentioned, the trail went cold. The vault was filled in, the bones were transported, and the official records were scrubbed. This wasn't just a local legend. It was a pattern of institutional silence that had been repeating for decades. But if you look at the archives, the story told by modern textbooks has massive, gaping holes. If you open any mainstream archaeology textbook today, you will find a very specific story about the ancient inhabitants of North America. The official narrative, cemented by the Bureau of Ethnology in 1879, insists that every mound and stone structure found in the Tennessee Valley was the work of recent indigenous ancestors. They claim these people used only basic stone tools and primitive methods. To suggest anything else, especially a race of giants, is treated as academic heresy. So, how does the establishment explain away the 1883 discovery? The modern debunking strategy is simple. They claim the story was invented by bored local journalists looking to sell papers. They point to the Philadelphia Record as the source of the sensationalism, suggesting that James Kelly and his miners were merely characters in a 19th century tall tale. But there is a massive problem with this hoax theory. On August 14, 1883, the New York Times, even then, a paper of record, published an article titled "A Remarkable Burial Ground." This wasn't just a brief mention. They provided specific details on the vault's dimensions and described the cement-like ceiling that protected the remains. If this was just a piece of yellow journalism, why did the most respected newspaper in the country verify the architectural complexity of the site? The red flags only get larger when you follow the paper trail. In nearly every newspaper account from that year, the same sentence appears: the bones were sent to Washington for the Smithsonian to examine. Yet, if you look at the annual reports of the Bureau of Ethnology between 1880 and 1894, those bones are nowhere to be found. There are no accession numbers, no sketches, no laboratory analysis. In the eyes of the Smithsonian's official record, the Laurel Creek Vault never existed. Think about that for a moment. Either dozens of independent journalists across multiple states collaborated on an identical lie, or the most powerful scientific institution in America intentionally lost the find of a lifetime. Why would they do it? Because 1883 was a pivotal moment in the creation of the American mythos. The establishment was desperate to prove that North America was a wilderness before European arrival, not the graveyard of a sophisticated, high-culture civilization. The discovery of a 9-foot giant in a stone vault didn't just break the laws of biology, it broke the laws of the narrative they were trying to build. They tell us it was a hoax, but the documents from 60 years earlier prove this was no 19th century fad. In fact, the deeper you look into the regional records, the more you realize that the 1883 discovery wasn't the beginning. It was the grand finale of a story the government had been trying to bury for decades. To understand how deep this rabbit hole goes, we have to look past the 1883 news cycle and into the dusty shelves of early American history. Modern skeptics love to claim that giant stories were just a byproduct of the sensationalist media boom of the late 19th century. But the facts don't support that. Long before the Philadelphia Record or the New York Times were even in circulation, the evidence was already being recorded by serious men of science. Take, for instance, the work of John Haywood. In 1823, he published a massive volume titled The Natural and Aboriginal History of Tennessee. Haywood wasn't a tabloid writer, he was a respected jurist and historian. And his findings were staggering. He documented multiple accounts of giant remains found throughout Tennessee 60 years before the miners ever set foot in that Laurel Creek vault. Haywood described skeletons that reached heights of 7, 8, and even 9 feet. He even recorded details that modern science finds impossible, such as skeletons with double rows of teeth. This proves that the giant of the hills wasn't a late-century invention. It was a long-standing, physical reality that had been encountered by the first settlers who moved into the Appalachian frontier. When we look specifically at the 1883 discovery, the most compelling evidence isn't even the bones, it's the vault itself. The miners described walls of smoothed stone and a chamber that was hermetically sealed with a mysterious, unknown cement. Ask yourself, who was making smooth stone vaults and synthetic cement in the ancient Tennessee wilderness? According to the official timeline, the local tribes at that time were not using megalithic masonry. They weren't building underground, airtight sepulchres. This implies a high level of engineering knowledge, perhaps even the use of geopolymers, that simply doesn't fit the primitive hunter-gatherer model. We also have visual breadcrumbs that manage to escape the memory hole. Consider the 19th century etching from the American Antiquarian, Volume 5. This illustration depicts what many believe to be the Great Stone Vault found in the region. In the image, you see the miners standing in a rectangular, structured room. The skeleton resting on the central slab makes the grown men surrounding it look like children. Look at the proportions. Look at the architecture. It doesn't look like a crude grave, it looks like a bunkers or a high-tech storage unit. Then, we have the words of the reporters who actually touched the remains. The New York Times article from August 14th didn't just mention the height. It explicitly stated that the skull was so large it could fit over a man's head like a helmet. If this was a hoax, it was a remarkably consistent one. Why would miners in rural Tennessee and journalists in New York all coordinate on the exact same anatomical anomalies? The Giant of the Hills report also mentions that the skeleton was found with artifacts that were of a strange and unknown design, but just like the vault and the bones, those artifacts never made it into a museum display case. There is a very specific type of silence that follows these discoveries. It's a silence that suggests the items weren't lost, they were repossessed. If you were trying to build a new world and a new history, you couldn't have 9-foot engineers buried in stone vaults in your backyard. You would need to wipe the slate clean. You would need to convince the public that the old world never existed here. The 1883 discovery was a physical, architectural reality that required a specific kind of technology. A technology linked to a lost empire. And once you realize that these vaults were part of a global network, the connection to the Tartarian Empire becomes impossible to ignore. What if the miners didn't stumble into a tomb, but into a piece of infrastructure that was never meant to be found by our modern civilization? When we talk about the Great Reset, many people assume we are talking about the future. But what if the greatest reset in human history has already happened? In the growing community of alternative researchers, the name Tartaria has become a shorthand for a global high-technology civilization that was systematically erased from our consciousness. This empire, Great Tartaria, supposedly spanned the globe, from the steppes of Eurasia to the rugged mountains of North America. They weren't just a different culture, they were a different kind of humanity. A race that understood frequency, atmospheric energy, and the true nature of the Earth. Proponents of this theory suggest that a global cataclysm, often called the Mud Flood, buried this civilization in the mid-19th century. And right here, in the Appalachian region of Tennessee, we find the smoking gun of this lost world. Think about the geographic location. The Appalachian Mountains are among the oldest on the planet. They are riddled with caves, mines, and subterranean anomalies. In the Tartarian framework, these mountains weren't just wilderness, they were a stronghold. The vaults discovered by miners in 1883 weren't just graves for giants. They were likely remnants of a massive underground infrastructure that survived the surface destruction. Why would the miners find a sealed room of smooth stone? Because it wasn't built by someone digging a hole. It was built by a civilization that specialized in megalithic masonry and geopolymer technology, the same technology we see in the star forts and crystal palaces across Europe and Asia. The timeline matches the Tartarian Great Cleanup perfectly. The period between 1850 and 1920 is the most suspicious window in modern history. This is the era when the Smithsonian was established. It's the era when the Great World's Fairs were used to showcase and then demolish massive stone architecture that couldn't have been built by the people of that time. In 1883, when those Tennessee miners broke through that stone wall, they weren't just finding a body. They were finding a survivor of the old world. The giant of the hills represented a biology that didn't fit the new narrative. If humans were 9 feet tall just a few generations ago, then the theory of slow, linear evolution is a fantasy. And if they lived in smooth stone vaults with synthetic cement, then our industrial revolution was actually a technological downgrade. Look at the similarities in architecture. The Tennessee Vault was described as having walls so perfectly joined that a knife blade couldn't fit between them. This is the exact same description used for the megalithic walls in Peru, Egypt, and the submerged ruins of the Pacific. It is a signature, a Tartarian signature left in the American soil. Researchers believe that the Smithsonian Institution was founded in 1846 with a very specific hidden mandate to act as the Ministry of Truth for the New World Order. Their job was to collect any evidence of the previous civilization, the giants, the free energy devices, the advanced maps, and place them in dead storage where the public would never see them again. The disappearance of the 1883 bones wasn't an accident. It was a recovery operation. Imagine you are an elite architect of the New World in the late 19th century. You are trying to convince the American public that they are the pioneers of a vacant, primitive land. Suddenly, a group of miners finds a 9-foot-tall aristocrat buried in a high-tech stone bunker. That discovery alone could trigger a revolution. It would prove that we aren't the first, and we certainly aren't the most advanced. So, you send in the agents. You notify the Bureau of Ethnology. You offer the miners a few dollars for their curiosities, and then you make the site disappear. The vault is filled back in with dirt. The local newspapers are told it was a hoax. The official survey teams arrive months later and find nothing but common Indian burials. This is how you delete a civilization, not with bombs, but with a pen and a museum basement. What if the mound builders weren't a separate primitive people, but the survivors of the Tartarian Empire who were trying to preserve their history underground? And what if the mud flood wasn't just a natural disaster, but a weaponized event used to bury the giants and their technology beneath our feet? Some researchers believe that the Tennessee mountains are still full of these sealed chambers. The miners of 1883 only scratched the surface. They found a sepulchre, but they might have been standing on top of an entire subterranean city. This is why the government is so protective of land rights in the Appalachians. This is why certain areas are strictly off limits to independent researchers. They aren't protecting the environment. They are protecting the seal on the old world. If this sounds like science fiction to you, then the programming is working. But you haven't seen what they are doing to hide the truth in the modern day. Because the war for our history didn't end in the 1880s. It's still being fought in the courtrooms and the Dina labs of the 21st century. The system is designed to keep those vaults closed. But the Earth is starting to give up its secrets again. If you think the days of disappearing giants ended with the Victorian era, you haven't looked at the legal framework of modern archaeology. The suppression of the Tennessee finds transition from simple lost crates in the 1880s to a sophisticated, legalized system of silence today. In 1891, the Smithsonian released the Powell Survey Report. This document was essentially the final solution for the giant mystery. John Wesley Powell, the man in charge, made it clear. Any discovery that suggested a race of mound builders separate from modern Native Americans was to be treated as a scientific impossibility. This wasn't an investigation. It was an ultimatum. It effectively fired any archaeologist who dared to report a 9-foot skeleton. But in the modern era, they have an even more effective tool, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, or NAGPRA. On the surface, NAGPRA is a respectful and necessary law. It allows indigenous tribes to reclaim the remains of their ancestors from museums and universities. But many alternative researchers believe the system is being exploited as a legal black hole for anomalous finds. Here is how it works. A construction crew or an independent researcher finds a skeleton in a stone vault that defies the official timeline. Instead of being measured, DNA tested, or photographed by the public, the remains are immediately classified as Native American by the local authorities. Under NAGPRA, they are then handed over to a tribal entity or an institutional warehouse and promptly reburied or restricted from all outside study. No one is allowed to ask if the skeleton had a double row of teeth. No one is allowed to verify if the height was 9 feet. The evidence is simply repatriated out of existence. It is the perfect crime. You can't accuse the government of hiding the bones because they are technically respecting the dead, but the result is the same. The truth remains buried, and the public is left with a sanitized, manageable version of history. Despite this, the technology of the 21st century is starting to see through the dirt. Recent ground-penetrating radar surveys in the Tennessee Valley have revealed something startling. In areas near the original 1883 site, GPR has detected large, perfectly rectangular cavities deep beneath the soil. These aren't natural caves. They are structured, hollow spaces that appear to be made of high-density material. Yet, when researchers apply for permits to excavate these anomalies, they are met with a wall of red tape. They are told the land is protected, or the dig would be culturally insensitive, or that the anomalies are just geological curiosities. If they are just rocks, why is the government so afraid of a shovel? The pattern hasn't changed in over 100 years. In 1883, They used yellow journalism as the excuse. Today, they use cultural sensitivity. But the goal remains the same: keep the public from seeing the physical proof that a race of giants once engineered the very ground we walk on. Established academia benefits by maintaining a linear, manageable timeline of human evolution. If they admit to the giants, they have to admit they've been wrong for a century, and government institutions benefit by avoiding the massive legal complications of land ownership that would arise if an unknown first race was proven to be the original inhabitants of America. The system is designed to keep those vaults closed. But the Earth is restless and the data is leaking out. You might be asking yourself, why does it matter? Why should we care about a pile of bones found in a Tennessee mine over 100 years ago? It matters because history is the foundation of our collective identity. If you can control a people's past, you can control their sense of what is possible in the future. If a global, advanced civilization like Tartaria truly existed, and if it was populated by a race of giants who mastered the Earth, then our entire understanding of reality is a fraud. Our textbooks teach us that we are the pinnacle of human achievement. They tell us we evolved from primitive scavengers to the masters of technology through a slow, agonizing grind of progress. But the Tennessee Vault suggests the opposite. It suggests that we are living in the shadow of a much greater, more sophisticated world that was stolen from us. Think about the implications for biology. If humans were once 9 feet tall with different skeletal structures, our understanding of DNA and human potential is fundamentally flawed. Think about the implications for energy. If these vaults were part of a global infrastructure that used the Earth itself for power, then our reliance on fossil fuels and wires is a form of technological slavery. The academic elite and the global power structures have invested tens of billions of dollars in maintaining the current timeline. Their grants, their prestige, and their authority are all tied to the out-of-Africa model and the primitive to advanced narrative. To admit to the giants of Tennessee is to admit that the experts have been the gatekeepers of a lie for over a century. The formula for control is simple. The suppression of the past equals the control of the future. By keeping us convinced that we are the first advanced civilization, they keep us from looking for the lost technology that could set us free. We aren't the peak of a mountain. We are the survivors of a reset, wandering through a museum we've been taught to call the wilderness. The Tennessee Vault was just one brick in a wall of lies that is finally starting to crumble. And once that wall falls, we might finally see who we really are. In the summer of 1883, a group of humble miners in Tennessee found the impossible. They saw the smooth stone, they touched the ancient cement, and they looked into the eyes of a 9-foot giant that shouldn't have existed. The media documented it, the public saw it, and the institutions, with surgical precision, erased it. The Tennessee giants and their sealed vaults are the smoking gun of the Tartarian reset. They are the physical proof that our history was rewritten to hide a global empire of giants. But the bones are still out there. They are likely sitting in the dead storage of a Smithsonian warehouse or buried deep beneath the Tennessee soil, waiting for the next miner to break the seal. The truth isn't hidden, it's just buried. And it's up to us to start digging. Check your local archives. Look for giant reports in your own town from the 1800s. You will be shocked at what you find. If you want to help us uncover the secrets of the old world, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Don't let them fill the vault back in. The Great Reset only works if we remain asleep. Stay curious, keep questioning, and never stop looking for the truth.